In 1953, the popular Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, was forced to resign in a coup. This event is often cited as an example of the United States interfering in Iranian domestic politics to advance its own interests at the expense of the popular will. What we'll do in this video, though, is just have a brief introduction to how we define coups, the conditions under which they occur, and the process by which they unfold. I'll end with an introduction to the events of the 1953 coup in Iran. The classic definition of a coup and description of how they take place was written by Edward Luttwak in 1969 in Coup d'etat, a practical handbook. Essentially, coups are a seizure of power through non-constitutional or irregular means by a small group of people. Key elements of this definition are small group. Coups are not cases of large groups of citizens demonstrating on the streets for change, and irregular. Coups do not use established channels of leadership change and often use violence, although less so than civil wars. Coups may replace popularly elected leaders, as in the military coup against Mohamed Morsi in Egypt in 2013, or a coup that took place 2 weeks ago in Mali, but they are also the most common way for monarchs to be removed from power, as with the coup that brought Muammar Gaddafi to power in Libya in 1969. And some countries get stuck in a cycle of military coups, as with Thailand, which has experienced 13 successful coups in the past 100 years, most recently in 2014. So when do coups happen? I want to highlight 3 different elements. First, the ruling government is often weak and divided, often due to an economic crisis. In Mali, for example, this month, the coup had followed popular protests against corruption by the president. In Iran in 1953, Mossadegh had been weakened by infighting within his faction of support. Second, there's usually a perceived threat against the military's or other actors' interests. For example, military support for Mossadegh declined after a purge of the officer corps in 1951, and the United States increasingly saw Mossadegh as a threat to its interests of maintaining stable oil markets and a united front against communism. Finally, coups require coordination among actors. This is more about how coups happen as opposed to why they happen, and this is our main focus for today. In political science, we tend to think of coups as coordination problems. Actors, that is the people who are involved in the coup, typically exhibit what's called strategic behavior. They observe events, make a cost-benefit analysis, and then decide what action they're going to take. In the case of coups, according to our reading by Nihal Singh, they will make a very specific cost-benefit analysis, that the costs of losing are so high, Mossadegh after all was sentenced to death, that what is most important here is to be part of the winning side, even if you don't fully agree with their goals. What they're looking for when they observe events then is evidence of who they think is going to win. Coup leaders know this, and so they work to send signals that they are in fact winning. Sometimes this is literally by broadcasting information over radio and TV. And sometimes they will take high-risk, high-visibility actions, like seizing a symbolic target or using targeted violence, in order to make this signal more believable. It's called a costly signal in game theory terms. This is why you typically see images like this, we're in Egypt again, coming out of coups. Leaders want to publicly demonstrate they are in control, because that is the best way to gain that control. Coups will usually involve 4 types of actions. Detain the existing leadership or force them into exile. This is an initial seizure of power. Seizing the means of communication with their co-conspirators, potential supporters, and the general public. This is typically done via TV and radio. They do this so that they can in fact send those signals that they are in fact in control. Later stages of a coup will involve stabilizing and consolidating that initial control. They'll typically do that through restrictions such as curfews or censorship on an opposition's freedom to speak and freedom to move. And they'll also maintain visible control, this is often through troops in the street, until they're in fact certain of their power. Just want to make one quick note on seizing communication channels. This is one of the elements of a coup that has changed the most in recent years. Seizing communication channels used to mean physically taking over the national radio station, and it still does. Coup leaders still have controlling TV stations on their to-do lists, as here in Turkey in 2016 and Thailand in 2014. But the internet has made this much more complicated. Turkish President Erdogan famously thwarted a 2016 military coup against him, in part because he was able to FaceTime from his iPhone and send out signals that he was mounting credible opposition to the coup. So how does the coup against Mossadegh compare to traditional coups? In some ways it was very typical. Perceived threats to military and international interests played a role in generating support. In others it was distinct, particularly in the role the international community played. Overall, the actors in the coup were a mixed bunch. A combination of players representing rising and declining international actors. One, the United States, beginning to flex its power, and another, the UK, trying to stave off a loss of economic power. As well as divided Iranian nationalists. While Mossadegh had unified support when he nationalized Iran's oil company in 1951, he had up and down relations with other politicians after that, including those who represented really important traditional interests like merchants, and actors of international concern like the Communist Party. In addition, in one way this coup was very unusual, in that the coup was not actually against the head of state, the Shah. It was rather used to strengthen a weak dictator by ousting a strong elected leader, Mossadegh, who was in fact 1951's Person of the Year. As to whether the how of the coup, the events that actually took place, whether that was typical or not, that's what we'll discuss in class on Monday.